What if the person you trusted the most was secretly planning your death? What if the man who kissed his daughters goodnight, read them bedtime stories, and tucked them into bed every evening was the last person they would ever see? On August 13, 2018, America came face to face with a terrifying truth. Evil doesn't always look dangerous. It doesn't always scream. It doesn't always threaten. Sometimes, it smiles politely, avoids confrontation, and blends into the background. This is the chilling true crime story of Chris Watts, a man who erased his entire family and then stood in front of cameras, calmly asking for them back. Welcome to Criminal Records, where we document real crimes, hidden motives, and the darkest truths behind ordinary faces. If you're new here, subscribe. Because some stories don't just haunt headlines, they stay with you. And this one is not easy to forget. Who was Chris Watts? Chris Watts was quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of man people described as harmless. He worked as an oil field operator in Colorado. He showed up on time. He followed rules. He rarely raised his voice. Friends and co-workers described him as calm, polite, and emotionally distant. Not aggressive, not controlling, not violent. In 2010, Chris married Shanann Watts. Shanann was his opposite, strong-willed, expressive, energetic, and outspoken. She loved social media. She loved sharing her life. And she loved her family firstly. Together, they had 2 daughters, Bella, age 4, Celeste, known as Cece, age 3. By 2018, Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with their 3rd child, a baby boy they planned to name Nico. Online, the Watts family looked perfect. Smiling photos, family videos, birthday posts, a picture-perfect American dream. But offline, their marriage was quietly collapsing. Cracks. Behind the smile, Shanann was dominant and expressive. Chris was passive and silent. Over time, resentment built, not through shouting or violence, but through silence. Chris didn't argue. He didn't confront. He absorbed everything and buried it. Financial stress added pressure. Medical concerns with the children created anxiety. The marriage became strained. And then, in mid-2018, everything changed. Chris met Nichol Kessinger, a co-worker. What began as casual conversations quickly turned into a full affair. With Nichol, Chris felt something new, or rather, something he thought he had lost. Freedom. He began losing weight. He bought new clothes. He started working out. Emotionally, he disconnected from his family. In his mind, his old life became a burden, and his new life became an escape. But instead of leaving, instead of divorcing, Chris began imagining a darker solution. August 13th, 2018, at 1:48 a.m., Shanann returned home from a business trip. Security footage captured her walking into the house. She was tired. She was pregnant. She believed she was safe. She never walked out. Chris later claimed they argued about separation, but investigators would uncover evidence suggesting something far more disturbing. Chris had already decided. That night, in their bedroom, Chris strangled Shanann. She was 15 weeks pregnant. She was exhausted. She never fought back. She never stood a chance. And while this happened, their daughter slept in nearby rooms. The unthinkable continues. After killing Shanann, Chris did not call police. He did not panic. He did not break down. Instead, he carried on. He woke up Bella and Cece. He wrapped Shannon's body in a sheet. He placed her into his truck. Then he loaded his daughters into the back seat, alive. Chris drove them to his worksite, Survey 319, an oil field. At that location, 1 child at a time, Chris smothered his daughters. Bella fought to live, and according to Chris's own confession, she begged him, "Daddy, no." After killing them, Chris placed their small bodies into oil tanks and buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. Then, he went to work. The mask slips. Later that day, Chris reported his family missing. He stood on his porch during a TV interview and said, "I just want them back." But something felt wrong. There were no tears, no panic, no desperation. Viewers noticed his cold demeanor. His neighbor's security footage revealed something chilling. Chris backing his truck into the driveway early that morning. An unusual behavior, a critical clue. The mask was slipping. Interrogation and confession. Police interrogated Chris for hours. At first he lied. Then he shifted blame. He claimed Shanann killed the children. But when confronted with evidence, Chris broke. He confessed. Investigators were stunned by how calm he remained. There was no emotional collapse, no visible remorse, only relief that the lies were finally over. Justice, but no closure. Chris Watts pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder on lawful termination of pregnancy. In November 2018, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No escape, no forgiveness, no second life. Why this case still haunts us? The Chris Watts case terrifies us because it destroys one comforting belief, that we can always recognize evil. Chris wasn't violent, he wasn't aggressive, he wasn't a criminal. He was quiet, empty, and willing to erase lives rather than face consequences. Sometimes, the most dangerous monsters don't look like monsters at all. They live next door. This was the Chris Watts case, a story that reminds us why criminal records exist. The Chris Watts case forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. The danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it doesn't arrive with warning signs, raised voices, or visible cruelty. Sometimes it hides behind routine, behind politeness, behind the illusion of a normal life. Chris Watts didn't snap in a moment of rage. He made decisions, cold, calculated decisions. And that is what makes this case so disturbing. It reminds us that emotional emptiness can be just as lethal as anger, that silence can hide resentment, and that avoidance, when left unchecked, can turn into something irreversible. For Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico, there were no second chances. Their lives were stolen by someone they trusted completely, someone who was supposed to protect them. And for the rest of us, this case leaves behind questions we may never fully answer. How well do we truly know the people closest to us? How many warning signs go unnoticed because they don't look like danger? The Chris Watts case is not just about a man who murdered his family. It's about the masks people wear, the lives we believe in, and the fragile line between appearance and reality. Because evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a husband, a father, a neighbor. And that is what makes this story impossible to forget.